Hi, and welcome to another interview with the bloggers that happen to live at my personal blog roll, which is right down there on the right side of my page. Amy Biancolli is a longtime friend of mine. We went to college together. Our circles have crossed in various places. At one point, we were both writing for the Times Union in one form or another. Amy has written 3 excellent books, and she currently has the blog called Figuring Shit Out. Yes, shit, the word S-H-I-T. It's right there in the blog, clear as day. She is a massive fan of Star Trek. She can play the violin like nobody else can. Amy, thank you so much for being part of this. And I saw you give a little face when I was talking about how you can play the violin. Am I wrong in this?
Well, I can play the violin.
You can't?
And maybe the violin, I think all in all, over the years, I've come to a point where I play pretty well, but there are many others who play better than I do. I just had to say that little.
It's all good. Amy, thank you for joining me on the blog on this Saturday. How you doing this Saturday morning?
Fine. Yeah, I'm glad that we're in a better state than we were even a month ago. I know some people are still glad that I'm vaccinated and my circle is vaccinated, and I'm getting out there a little more, so that's a relief.
I definitely know the feeling. I got the double Pfizer, so
Yeah, me too.
I am following the word of Bill Gates, our overlord.
That's right.
Amy, for those readers who have not yet followed Amy on a regular basis, give us an example of where Figuring Shit Out came from.
Okay. Well, the origin story is actually pretty straightforward. Well, no origin story is pretty straightforward, but in this case, it started with a massive tragedy in my life, which was my husband Christopher Ringwald's suicide in 2011, and the first year after his death was impossible to describe, but I did my best to describe it in the book I wound up writing, this memoir called Figuring Shit Out. And as soon as I got a publisher for it, it was kind of crazy. I wrote it, when I think back on it, it seems absolutely bananas that I started writing this book just on my own, just because I needed to, maybe after Chris's death. So I was still in the middle of the first year of mourning, and I wrote the book, started writing it in the present tense because I was still living it. And that just kind of happened. It's a short book. It's very eccentric. It's very profane. And I sent it around. I was very lucky to get a great agent who kept at it, and finally wound up with this small but pretty fierce publisher, this Baylor Publishing. They push a lot of sort of really affirming memoirs of people who are overcome obstacles, and it wound up being a great fit. And the one thing I had to do, like right off the bat, oh my gosh, I gotta get a platform out there. And so I created this blog, Figuring Shit Out, as a way to promote the book. And I hate the word brand, but I guess that's what we all have to live with, is the word brand and the concept of brand. And I'm not very good at branding, but I did jump whole hog into blogging, and I didn't always use sort of the same voice, present tense voice that I used for the book, but I frequently did. I still do sometimes. I have like different voices that I use, but the blog was a way for me to kind of continue these reflections that are included in the book. In the book, I should say, it's chronological, it's linear, but it's also in these short form essays. So it's a bunch of short, punchy, weird chapters. And that's what the blog became, kind of short, punching, weird. I kind of kept that idiosyncratic mindset. Maybe not quite as much profanity beyond the word shit, but still plenty. But that's how that happened.
And one of the great things about your blog, and it's really an amazing thing, is that you go full bore to no subject is off limits, and you spend as much time or as much detail as possible talking about your emotions, your feelings, the feelings of those around you. How important is that, both in blogging and in writing, to be able to communicate your feelings and your emotions from something that's kept in your mind and in your heart, and make it something that's tangible and on paper and in picture?
That's a really good question. And actually you broke up a little bit. I don't know if it's probably my internet, and apologies if that's the case, but I think I understood your question about how critical it is to me to tap into, understand, channel my emotions. And the thing is, I don't know how to put this. After Chris died, certainly after I lost my parents and sister, who she was also died by suicide. But I lost my parents and sister in the early 90s, and I wrote a book about that. And that really helped me channel my grief. And writing Figuring Shit Out after Chris died really helped me channel my grief. And in both of those book writing experiences, and to a smaller extent, but still significant, with the blog, I mean, it's still to a large extent and really important element for me, because when I'm writing, to me, the gift of writing, the gift of doing what I do, the gift specifically of memoir, is that it allows me to take all sorts of piles of crap that happened to me. And then, that's a really terrible image to use, but turn into something else, and not turn into something else, but to understand it, kind of say, okay, what is this? How am I feeling? This is awful, but what am I feeling? And what is this related to? And what is it authentically? And then I'm able to turn it into a narrative, which I'm not saying that I'm turning it into fiction, although there's certainly validity to that. But I'm placing it in a longer arc. And in a way, it allows me to understand it better. Like if something happens to me and I look at it in the context of my emotions, and then I look at my emotions in the context of my life, and I'm processing it all in a way that maybe I wouldn't if I weren't writing about it. So I did that, as I said, the first memoir I wrote, that really helped me. A friend of mine a doctor friend who does a lot of hospice work, she called it grief work. And I think the other memoir, Figuring Shit Out, was definitely grief work too. And I think that actually the blog, even though it's now almost 10 years since Chris died, the blog also continues to be, in a lot of ways, not just grief work, but just the work of trying to understand, who I am, what my emotions are, we're all winging it, right? So anything that we can do to understand ourselves as we move forward and say, well, this happened, why did that happen, and what do I feel about it? I think it makes it easier, I think, for me anyway. So that wasn't that wasn't a long story short. That was a long story long, but
It's okay. Now, I will confess that for longtime readers of both your blog and mine, who might notice some similarities, we both went to college together, and I don't know if we had classes together. I'm assuming we had the same professors, but probably not in the same classes.
Mhm.
And I would argue that some of the Hamilton College professors gave us some serious nuggets of intelligence and knowledge that helped us in our careers. I mean, I could argue that A.B. Paulson was a godsend for me. And I'm sure there was a professor or three that helped guide your writing career as well.
Fred Wagner. Fred Wagner. I loved that man.
Yeah,
He helped
Fred,
me in so
Wagner
many
was
ways.
the greatest.
Yeah, yeah. He had the best laugh too. It would yeah, just rock the building. Yeah. No, he was really, really important to me. I had reached a point, mm, based on a couple of the classes that I'd taken my freshman year. I'm not going to name names, but I there was one class in particular, which a professor actually wrote in margin that and I wanted to be a writer. I wanted to be an English major. I just and I don't think he was trying to be anything other than flippant, but he wrote in the sidelines, "Why are you wasting my time?" And it's funny because my mother she was a concert violinist, and she used to say, "It's the people who tell you you can't who aren't motivating you as much as the people who tell you you can." Which I think she's right. But in retrospect, I hung on to that. Like that echoed in my ears for ages. And it's kind of I'll show you. That's how mom always put it. I'll show you. But in that immediate math, I'm like, oh my God, I don't have anything to say. Why do I think I can be a writer? Why? And I really doubted it. And then the next semester I took a class with Fred Wagner. And I will never forget this. He had it down. He had this system. He was not only brilliant and incredibly warm, but he had it down with papers. Like if you submitted a paper, you'd get it back corrected, and he would flag all the little writing issues you had and then point to, remember the Hamilton College style book that they released?
Remember that? Yes.
Yeah. And he it was like basically grammar and other elements of style, but he would put in the margins the actual page number. And I remember him pointing to a couple places, diction, correct your diction, or foggy diction. And then you put the page number. And so the first time you got this paper back, he would say to us, okay, if you have marks pointing you to a page number in the style book, I expect you next time you submit a paper to show that you looked it up and you address those issues with your writing. And I was like, oh my God. And I'm reading it, and it basically, if you have muddy diction, then you go on saying too much in the wrong way, using too many puffy words like really and definitely and blah, 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 and all this. And I'm like, he was pointing out the same thing that the other professor had pointed out, but he was pragmatic and compassionate. Now, in very, very nuts and bolts. It's like just saying, why are you wasting my time? He's saying, okay, your diction is a little muddied, so fix it. So it was just, nobody had ever told me what to repair. It's like you take your car into the garage and like, oh, what's going on with the engine? Like, well, it's knocking. We gotta repair the hose. And finally, I had a professor who said, let's repair. You have to go take out that hose and patch it. So that was Fred Wagner.
Most definitely. I did take him for a Faulkner and Southern Contemporaries class.
Yeah. Okay. We took that, if not together at the same time. We both took that class. Yeah.
Yes, I do remember that. Great moments. One of your blog posts that has been listed pretty much as your top post. You go to the FSO page, Slave Castles and Its Weight on History.
Yeah, I have it pinned there.
That's why I was going to say, for those who really should read this, what is it about the slave castles and the fact that these are the buildings that young men in Ghana were taken to before they were hoisted onto the ships and taken away from their families. And just that the importance of a story like that.
Yeah. It was just really visceral. It was this was a couple years ago. My younger daughter was taking a semester in Ghana, and I had never been to any of the African countries. So, oh my gosh, this is an opportunity. So I flew over, we traveled around, and she had already been to, they call them slave castles. They're basically fortresses. They're forts. Where, as you were saying, these, not just men, but, you know, women too. Many people would come in, families, I think, as well. Yeah. Anyway, it was horrific. These hubs of the slave trade in along Ghana's Cape Coast, along the western coast, and there, the ships would just, it's usually, you know, the slave trade in the Americas, and so many people died. Countless people died en route. Countless people died held in these cells, and it was so visceral. It was so, just standing there. It's so hard to describe. I think I described it in the blog post as like, you can feel the weight of history. You can feel the weight of the people who suffered and died there. And I just had this urge. I wanted to tell every single American, especially every white American who maybe doesn't entirely comprehend it, or maybe they think they do. I think anybody, even if they think they comprehend slavery, whoever they are, if they have an opportunity, if they're anywhere near Ghana ever, they should go visit those slave castles. But I'll never forget, this moment in one of them, you know, different rooms. Oh yes, in this room, you know, there were hundreds of people who were crammed in, and people would die of all sorts of diseases and starvation. They would defecate there. They would, you know, women would be taken out and raped and brought back. The babies that were taken from them, it's just awful. But at one point, whenever an enslaved person tried to escape and was caught, then it was a death sentence. But it was the most horrific death sentence you could imagine. They would put that person in this tiny cell smaller than this little space I'm in right now, maybe the size of the space I'm in here, and just had no air, no windows, nothing, nothing at all. And they would shut the door until they died. So they brought us in there. It was a group of maybe 8 people on the tour, and the tour guide, I'll never forget this. He said, okay, I'm going to shut the door, and we're going to stand here silently for, I don't remember what it was, a minute or two. It felt like forever, but he said, just to give you a taste of what it's like. And it was unforgettable. I mean, and it's inconceivable, except it's tragically conceivable that this happened. And I just, yeah. So that's why I pinned it to the top. I would like whoever needs to read it to maybe stumble across it.
You know, and as a friend of mine once said, once you know, you can't unknow.
Yeah. 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 It's just, it's, yeah. The word I keep going to is visceral. It's just hard to explain. I just could feel it.
Now, there are moments on the FSO blog where you are talking about some of the moments that are sort of like checks off your life list, like events that you've always wanted to do or people that you've always wanted to meet. Which of course brings us to one of your favorite TV shows, Star Trek. I seem to recall many times reading about your love of the show. So let's start off with, who is your favorite captain and why is it Captain Janeway?
Oh, you know what I'm going to answer, John.
So, number one.
Oh, gosh. Okay. I have to say Captain Kirk because I fell in love with the show and with Captain Kirk, William Shatner, when I was 14. And you know how it happens. When you fall in love with something when you're 14, that's how it goes. I know I love the original series. It was just, people who don't really understand it or who criticize it for being, I don't know, the effects are kind of cheap or whatever. They don't really understand how transformative it was. It was a TV show. First of all, it was a color show. And if I'm not wrong, I'm pretty sure that actually it was the #1 NBC color show at its time, but it was in color. It presented a vision of the future that was hopeful. And it had a diverse cast. It actually, it had an African-American woman in a significant position on the bridge. I had the first interracial kiss on American television.
You had a helmsman who was a Soviet. You had another helmsman who
A
was
helmsman, right? Yep. You had a Japanese lieutenant on the bridge. Yeah, absolutely. So it was Japanese American. But so it was all those things. And on top of it, it was the first, well, I don't want to say the first science fiction show, but certainly the first in a while that treated science fiction as a grown-up. Because before that, you had, it's like Lost in Space and kiddie stuff. That
Flash Gordon.
Yeah. So, yeah, I love it. But, I'm also... I love so many other later series in the franchise. I was, big Next Generation fan, Voyager with Janeway. I love Deep Space Nine. I'm a huge fan of Discovery. I think that's great. Picard is good. I think this is where I'm getting really nerdy. The second season of Discovery is just fantastic, and I love Captain Pike. The Captain Pike.
Like the third season, I know what they had to do to get, but it's like watching the Discovery series. It's not self-contained episodes. It's more arcs like you would have found on Babylon 5.
Yep.
But at the same time, you're not really sure where the arcs are going to go. Like the series, you know that the arc is going to stop at the end of the season.
Yeah, no, it's interesting, and every season has been different from the previous one, and it'll be interesting to see what the new Strange New Worlds show is with Captain Pike, because I thought Anson Mount was fantastic as Pike in Discovery, and I love Ian Peck as the young Spock, and I'm getting into heavy nerd zone here, but
well, I guess what I was going to lead to was I know that you are a big fan person of William Shatner.
Mm-hmm.
If I'm not mistaken, you had the opportunity to actually meet Mr. Shatner.
Yeah, that was crazy. That was, I don't know, when was that? 2018, 2017, I think 22 years ago, I don't know. COVID has...
At the Star Trek New Voyages place up in Ticonderoga?
No, it wasn't up there. It wasn't up there, although I have been up there a couple times. 3 times, actually. Oh, goodness. What a nerd. Yeah, no, it was Proctor's had an event. It was a screening of Star Trek II, The Wrath of Khan, followed by a Q&A with William Shatner. He was touring around the country with us. And God bless him, my friend Michael Eck at Proctor's, who knows me well, he called me and said, Amy, would you like to moderate? And of course, I'm like, yes, after I come to after passing out on the floor. And it was an amazing event for me to meet him. And he is a fascinating, incredibly smart and curious guy. Really, really interesting fellow. I arrived early. They told me to get there early, so I went backstage and I just walked into a room. I wasn't expecting, like, oh yeah, wait in here, and then we'll call you when we need you. But I didn't realize when they were letting me into the backstage room that Shatner would be there and that he would, look up and say, oh, hello. but I chatted with him backstage, and he was really, he asked me a million questions, which I think is always the mark of an interesting person, you know, who's curious. And yeah, it was really amazing. And then on stage, he went into performance mode, because having been, you know, a theater actor before he went into TV and then film, he plays, and you can see in Star Trek, he plays to the balcony, because it's just, those were his theater roots, and so he was totally in his element on the stage of Proctor's and told one story after another. And I realized early on I was sitting there with questions from the audience, and also questions that I had brought along to ask, and I realized early on that I was really there to be a foil. Like he recognized early on that he could give me shit and that would work, and I wouldn't, you know, have a problem with it. So that became sort of his approach to the whole. When I got the question cards on the floor, he had a great time with that, and he made fun of my name in a very amusing way. You know, it was not in an offensive way, just a very funny way, and he told these amazing stories. It was definitely. I hate the term bucket list, but that was definitely checked off.
A check off?
Oh.
Walked into that.
Yeah, I did. I set it up.
Well, I mean, if that ever happens with me and Linda Carter, I'll make sure that I'll pass that along.
Yeah. Yeah, but no, it was just a great evening. He's quite an interesting fellow, and when I say he gave me grief, it not in any cruel way. It was just funny. I just realized, oh, I'm the straight woman. Just realizing on stage he's performing, and I'm there. Yeah, I managed to ask some questions about his life and career, but mainly I was there to be the foil, to be the straight woman. And I'm glad I recognized it early on, because it meant I was able to go along with it, and it was a lot of fun.
Mm-hmm. When you're blogging, one of the things that, at least I know from when I blog, is you always want to see if you're going to get any comments from something and what the comments might be. Mm-hmm. And after you filter out the spam bots who want to sell you, oh, who knows now? I think they're talking about herbicides or something. You get a core of readers that are always attentive, always asking questions, always bringing more to the table from a story that you've written. Talk to me about the relationship between yourself and your blog readers.
Yeah, that's another really good question, and you know as much or more about that even than I do. And I just think, I think it's not just with blog readers. I think it's with all readers. You know, readers of some of the stuff I wrote for the Times-Union. Now, when I'm writing for Mad in America, and then people responding to a couple of the videos that I have, like I did a Ted Albany talk and a Moth talk, and people will find me in various ways and reach out. And what strikes me, and this comes through in the blog comments, is people respond to a story by wanting to share a little bit of their story. And that is so deeply human. I mean, we're here as a species. We're still here as a species because we sat around a fire and told one another stories. And I think it's easy to lose track of that, at least in an interpersonal level. I mean, obviously, considering how much time most of us spend watching stories, like on screens, we obviously still find ways to meet that need, but it doesn't really get met in that way, because what we need to do is connect individually. And I think when somebody reads a story, they see a piece of themselves. and then they wind up sharing back. And to me, that shrinks the world. And it doesn't matter. Like I've made connections this way. Sometimes they reach out to me via Facebook Messenger. They find me on Facebook, and or they find me on the blog, and they reach out because they've suffered a suicide loss, they've died, and they want to, and they feel a little less alone. And then when they reach out to me and I read an account from somebody in, I don't know, across the country or across the world, it just, the world shrinks and I feel a little less alone. And to me, that's the power of story. And that's the power of specifically really intimate human story, because like the way I always put it, if you shoot for the universal, you wind up in cliche. This is especially true in movies. But if you shoot for the intimate, you wind up with universal, something that people can connect with. And to me, that's profound. I mean, when somebody comments on figuring shit out or something and tells me, oh, you know, suicide really helped, I'm glad I found this blog or whatever, I can never undo the horror of losing Chris. It's like that will always be a terrible in my life, but that doesn't mean that good can't come in the aftermath. And to me, these connections are a big piece of the good. Yeah.
Most definitely. Mad in America.
Yeah.
Tell us about Mad in America.
So it's a nonprofit webzine. It's a foundation that's devoted to mental health, but specifically to, or I should say broadly, because it's man, it covers a lot of bases, but it questions the medicalized big pharma paradigm of mental health. What mental health means, the whole idea of mental illness, the labels that get thrown on people, the meds that get prescribed. And it's a fascinating website. It was founded actually by former Times Union science writer, Robert Whitaker, who's written books on the subject, including Mad in America, Anatomy of an Epidemic, which is specifically about the epidemic of psychiatric disability. And he's a man on a mission, and he founded this, and it's grown and grown and grown. And as I said, it's got a pretty big tent in the sense that there's a wide spectrum of views. I mean, there's there's one section of it that's devoted to reporting on the latest research into psych meds and such. And then there are blogs, which are written by people with lived experience in the psych system. And then there's other stuff. There are MIA reports, which I contribute to as a reporter. But within that wide tent are people who are absolutely anti-psychiatry. And at the other end are people who maybe work within the psychiatric system, like therapists and psychologists and even some psychiatrists who advocate and work toward change within the system. And there are people who, for instance, they respond well to meds. And then there are people who have struggled for years to get off them, who had a bad experience. So it's a pretty extraordinary website, and it also has a social justice component. So the logo is science, psychiatry, and social justice, and it frames everything in terms of human rights.
I definitely wanted to mention that because that's something that's very important.
Yeah, and it's on the one hand, having spent so much time covering the arts and covering film, it might seem, a world apart. It is totally in sync with so much of what I'd previously written, not just figuring shit out, but even, frankly, some of the people I would interview on my beat, had stories to tell. And I always felt like whether they were dealing with some form of adversity, whether it was, racism or some sort of medical challenge, everybody's got a story to tell. I'm in a position now where I'm listening to some pretty extraordinary stories, and doing my best to render them.
Definitely. Couple more questions, and then I always ask this of all of the writers on the blog roll. Where do you think the future of blogging is going to go?
Oh, wow. I have no idea. I don't know. I mean,
He is a press policy here.
the thing is, like, you could say we're already there because the younger generation is on TikTok. You know what I mean? Like, the old parts are on WordPress, but I don't know. I really don't know. Well, you could, on the other hand, you've got Substack, which is more than blogging. And that's interesting because it's kind of I don't know, it's a combination of blogging and journaling. And that's interesting because it gives people independence and allows people to make a little bit of money. I don't know. I think it'll be interesting to see. I mean, I've never been good at predicting technology, so or changes in the industry. I mean, I couldn't have seen any of this coming. So
No, I don't think any of us could.
mm.
And then finally, one of the things that people might not know about Amy is for many years, she was a top movie and TV critic for both the Times-Union and earlier for the Houston Chronicle. And
I never did the TV.
you never did the TV?
No.
No, movie critic anyway. So Amy, I'm going to ask this. You knew I was setting it up for it.
Mm.
Why do you hate the film Machete so much?
Oh, I don't even remember why, Chuck. I remember that I hated it. And I remember that you took issue with the fact that I hated it. And I remember every time that you brought it up. But here's the thing. This is another of those things that I've described the same way over and over again. But the way I describe it is that when I worked as a film critic, I saw so many movies, not just the movies I was reviewing every week, but I had to do research and say, oh my gosh, I have to catch up on this director's films. I haven't seen, I watched so many movies in the course of a week, and then catching up with the new releases, that I would forget them because I had to. I had a shelf of 6 movies in my brain. And as soon as I saw one movie, one would fall off the shelf. So thank goodness for the internet, or I wouldn't be able to Google, my name and then the name of some movie that came out in the 2000s, or the 90s. I'd be lost. So I remembered that I thought it was, I don't know.
You were
probably remember
a fan of if I remember correctly, you were not a fan of the over-mexploitation of Robert Rodriguez.
Yes.
A lot of the stereotypes, a lot of the things were played for comedy and were played for shock value. And
I'm not good with shock value.
And I took it differently. I thought it was a fun movie to watch. It was hilarious.
Yeah.
And eventually it sort of became a bit of a, like you say potato, I say potato.
Yeah. Well, and the thing is too, is that, I would write a review I would see a movie and then have to churn out the review, maybe the next morning, usually, maybe a day or two later. And there have been occasions when I've gone back to movies that I saw and reviewed one day and gone, oh, I actually like this, or oh, this is terrible. So I mean, as with any moviegoer, a lot of it is dependent on mood and circumstances and, what you ate for dinner or what have you. So it's entirely possible that if I went back and watched it, I would have a different take on it right now. I'm not saying I would, definitely, but it's possible.
I would recommend skipping Machete Kills. By that time, Danny Trejo was just too old for the role, and he was just going through the motions.
Okay. All right. I'll keep that in mind.
But Amy, thank you so much. It's been a wonderful time spending here with you this Saturday morning on the blog recap. If you definitely need to go over to the blog roll down here and look up Amy Biancolli, Figuring Shit Out. You click on that, and once you start reading, you probably won't stop for at least a couple of hours. It's really good stuff. Amy, thank you so much for being part of this.
Well, thank you, Chuck. It's great to see you and have a chat with you, even via Zoom. And thanks for inviting me and for all the kind things you said.